My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice cold. I'm only here to even the score. Whoa. My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice cold. We're down right now, but did it before. Whoa. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Knighted Ones podcast, episode number 50. That's right, the big 50. Thank goodness I'm not that old yet, but I'm excited that we're on this episode. As a reminder, we are the only podcast that features a former UCF national champion, a former UCF radio host, an ESPN analyst and hoops player, an infamous rapper, our resident influencer, an IG star shooting the breeze talking UCF sports. And remember to follow us on YouTube, IG, and check out the 70-plus teams and conferences on the College Huddle, which we are a part of. Now, one other thing that I was teasing over the last couple of weeks was a new podcast that we would be participating in that's coming to reality. So this week on Thursday, I'll actually be representing us as part of the Big Three as it comes to college football. So I'll be joining a resident Florida Gator, a Florida FSU Knoll, and me. Guess who we left out? Miami. And so look out for that. It's going to be called Fourth in Florida. We'll be recording it on Thursday, and it'll probably drop on Monday. So super excited. We are now part of the Big Three, and Miami is out. That being said, Nobra, unfortunately, could not make it this evening. We had to record on Tuesday night instead of Monday, which conflicted with his schedule. But before we go any further and start introducing everybody, I just wanted to throw a quick shout out to Josh Lazar, our family member here on the podcast. Unfortunately, he lost someone in his family and isn't able to join us, and just wanted to wish our condolences and that we're thinking about him. So make sure if you're so inclined, say a quick prayer for Josh and his family as they work through this. Now, that being said, we have some exciting things to talk about this week. We've got more camp action, more interviews have happened, and we want to dig into the offense a little bit this week. And to help me do that, let's start with welcoming Ben Stout to the show. Ben Stout, it feels like it's been 3 months. How are you?
It's been too long, man. What's up? I'm glad to be back.
Glad to have you back.
Episode 50, too. That's awesome, man.
I know. Pretty soon, we got 2 more episodes, and we'll officially have been at this for a full year, which is crazy, but exciting. And we're going to be welcoming some of our folks from the past to help us celebrate that in a couple of shows. So I'm excited to do that as well. And last but not least, but definitely not last, this week, Alan Levin. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Hey now. I'm just kidding.
hey now.
I had to, Noah's not here, so I had to kind of throw it in for him.
Are you going to give us the hair flip too? Because we got to have the hair flip.
I officially cut the hair, so I still cut along. But,
still got plenty of hair there.
Yeah.
Listen, by that, we're still doing the 1,000 followers challenge, right? So he only, for those of you listening on podcasts, he only cut like an inch or so off of that. By the time we get to 1,000 followers, it should have grown back, and he's still going to have to cut his hair. So he's not getting out of that. He did not cut it short. So, he promised you, he promised me. And I did want to welcome some of the new listeners this week and new followers on our YouTube channel because we did grow again this week. So keep them coming, tell your friends, and let's grow this family together. All right. All that being said, and Alan's hair aside, let's go ahead and start with our offensive preview. I've enlisted the guys this week to help me pull some stats, kind of talk about what's happened in camp. So, Ben, why don't we start by breaking down the offensive positions, and why don't you give us a little bit of history on what these QBs have done. And then we can talk a little bit about what we are looking for in camp this week. So let's start with QB first. Take it away.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, obviously we even though there's been a little bit of smoke this week or last couple weeks about Jacurri Brown pushing KJ Jefferson, we all know who QB1 is going into this season, and that's KJ Jefferson out of Arkansas. He is a really a sixth-year guy, coming here for his last year of eligibility. Last season at Arkansas, he really just had a really solid year. He's been fantastic over the last 3 years. Been a very consistent starter for them. Last year fell off a little bit from the previous year, 2021 and 2022. But he has got it done on the ground and got it done in the passing game. Last year, 2,100 yards through the air, a 7.1 average, and 19 touchdowns with 8 interceptions. The 2 years prior to that, though, 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions in 2022. 21 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in 2021. So last year was a little bit of uptick on the interception rate versus his touchdowns. Had a little bit of a down year versus the previous 2, but looking to explode here once he gets on campus. And he's somebody that we're super excited that can get it done not only with his arm, but when he needs to. He's not a run-first quarterback as far as what we had seen here the last couple of seasons with JRP, but certainly is capable with his massive size. He can get it done on the ground too and break some tackles. He's listed at about 6'3", 6'4", 245 right now, probably in the range of a little bit above 250, I'd say, probably. But as he gets into game shape, that's probably where he hovers around. And so I think he's got a threat through the air and a threat on the ground. And then backing him up just real quickly, we got Jacurri Brown out of Miami. He spent his freshman and sophomore year at Miami. Most notably, his freshman year, he got the most playing time. He played in 8 games, had modest stat line, but he's somebody who like KJ, has a strong arm. He's got decent size to him. He's a little bit on the thinner side, but somebody who's been was a highly recruited player coming out of high school, and somebody
hold on, Ben. Did you just call KJ thick? Is that what I just heard?
No, I said that Jacurri was more on the thinner side compared to KJ, which is
okay. I just wanted to make sure we got that terminology right.
Statement than anything else. But
all right.
So that's really the QB1 and 2. I mean, we obviously have plenty of space in the QB room as far as who could emerge as QB3. It seems like it's going to be Dylan Risk at the moment, but those are kind of the main 2 guys that we're looking to contribute the most this season. Obviously, we've got some bright future behind those 2 guys that we're excited to see and hopefully will see in a UCF uniform in Dylan Risk, EJ Colson, Trujillo, and some others. But those are the 2 guys kind of 1 and 2 that it seems to be the consensus coming out of training camp.
Yeah. So the big thing for me, and I want to throw this out there because you mentioned it, EJ Colson, right? So he was much heralded in the last class, and actually, we talked about Landon Duckworth last week at QB, and Oregon landed another QB, and it really, really does look like he's trending towards us, another 4-star quarterback. I think he's a top 150 player in the country. So that's exciting. Today's day and age, the QB room, especially with the transfer portal and everything else that's going on, the QB room is going to always be in flux. Like the thing about KJ Jefferson, I agree with you, 100% going to be the guy under center game 1. Jacurri Brown, though, he's a little interesting. He got beat out last year, but was expected to compete for QB1 this year at Miami and transferred to UCF instead. Behind him, I still think that, I don't know if Risk would be number 3, but I think EJ Colson and Trujillo, because you've heard a lot about Trujillo quite a bit as well.
Yeah.
Who's another big, tall, to use your word, thick quarterback, who could definitely can throw the heat. So I don't know, behind Jacuri and KJ, I don't think it's actually Dylan Risk. I think it's going to be either EJ Colson, depending on how he's proceeding physically, or if it would be Riley Trujillo. At this stage, it really doesn't matter. I hope we don't have to find out, especially if QB1 and QB2 go down.
Yeah.
But I mean, last year, QB1 went down, QB2 played, so QB3 becomes QB2. So if something else happens, look at what happened with Syracuse last year. They were playing a tight end at QB versus the Cows in the bowl game. So it's really, really interesting. But I do hear that Jacuri has really applied himself. I saw some interviews with some of the offensive staff, and he seems to be catching the system pretty quickly, which always bodes well, because that's the biggest thing when you get someone who transfers in the spring, right before summer camp, that they get a grasp on the system. But it seems like he's proceeding pretty well. So, Alan, what do you think? Who do you think would be QB3 by your estimation?
I think it's Rizik or Risk, however you say it. It makes the most sense for someone like Colson to obviously redshirt, given that he's supposed to be in high school this year. And then Trujillo, same thing. I mean, he's not supposed to redshirt, but he's or not supposed to be in high school still at Trujillo, but he's a true freshman. So it makes sense for it to be Risk, because he actually does have some playing time, even though it was in garbage minutes at the end of games last year. But he's had some playing time. So I think just with a comfortability level with the coaching staff, he's been in the program now going on his second year, been through 2 full camps. I think it makes sense for him to, take that QB3 spot. But it is interesting. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you guys said, that obviously KJ is the guy, but just hearing it kind of, to me, somewhat not to the level, but it kind of mirrors the JRP Mikey Keene situation to me. Like, you have this guy that's coming in that's expected to be, elite, one of the best quarterbacks we've had since Dylan Gabriel. And now you're hearing whispers of, Jacuri's pushing him. Granted, I know we'll talk about this later. KJ hasn't been live in scrimmages, so I think there's something to be said about that. But it is interesting that, someone like Brown is coming in, and, like you said, I think KJ will be starting in week 1, but we've seen things in the past. Brandon Wimbush was the bona fide week 1 starter, and then by week 2 it was Dylan Gabriel. So you never know, but I think the situation's a little different. But yeah, I mean, I think
I definitely think it was different. I definitely, to your point though, I think it was different with Wimbush, because I think DG was deemed, as at least for his passing ability, as the clear-cut person who was going to be taking over, right? And Wimbush at the time, for those that don't remember, he was a 4-star quarterback that came to us, that was the starting quarterback at Notre Dame on some pretty good teams, and then came here, and it just didn't work out. But I think that DG, the thought process was give him a few games to get settled in, and then actually get him out on the field. But that was the past. That was, a time when you had the ability to throw a QB in and grow with a QB. These days, right, especially at the level that we're at, plus with what NIL is, that doesn't happen anymore. So, would Mackenzie Milton have gotten his shot in today's age the first year, his freshman year, when he played Maryland, and we watched him, do some pretty amazing things, although we ended up fumbling away that game, literally. Literally, I was there. In this day and age, would something like that happen? The days of that are over. So really, it's almost like one of those quarterbacks have to be aware that if you don't play, like we were talking about EJ Colson for next year and Ja'Cory Brown for next year, if we have Duckworth come in, what does that look like now, right? So does Duckworth, they're taking a risk because does Duckworth blow them both out of the water? And he's a highly touted high school prospect. So, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how that works. But I have a lot of faith in EJ Colson. Oh, and let me pause here right now. We lost Trey Neal right before we started the show. I think he had to use the restroom. But he is coming to us from out of state, and I'm going to add him back to the show. There's Trey Neal. What's up, Trey?
What's up, man?
Your power's back?
Yeah, well, it flickered off, and then I guess the generator kicked on, but the Wi-Fi was off.
So Trey, right now, you're in what? Kansas City right now?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. That's right. St. Louis. Okay. So note to self, St. Louis's power is not great. So if you're traveling to St. Louis, make sure you have a mobile hotspot. Otherwise, you may drop right before the show and get made fun of for something you probably didn't do. So, Trey, welcome back to the show. Let's get your trademark hair flip. There it is. If you guys aren't watching on the show, he's got the full head and shoulders motion going on right now. He's putting his neck into it. He's putting his neck into it. All right, that's a reference for a show in the past. But welcome back. We'll just kind of catch you up. We're talking about the QB depth, and we were talking about QB1 obviously being KJ, Ja'Cory Brown, and who QB3 could be, whether it be EJ Colson, Riley Trujillo. I always have a hard time with that. Trujillo is how you actually say it. Yeah, and your peers were saying that they think it's definitely Dylan Risk. And from a QB perspective, how different it is in the NIL world versus what it has been in the past. So my take on it is it's either EJ Colson. I think it would be EJ Colson as QB3, even though he literally missed his senior year in high school or part of it to play for us. Would you see, you were there when Mackenzie Milton came on board. He was relatively young. Would you trust someone like EJ Colson? God forbid that we actually got to QB3 for whatever reason this season. But if we did, would you trust a kid that young to come in and play QB for us versus maybe Dylan Risk who was last year?
Probably not, to be honest. It's just the experience of seeing it live. I think unless, again, Mackenzie, to me, he's the exception. He came in the summer, but he flashed such high upside plays that summer to where it's like, yeah, he's going to give you, the lows, but the highs are just so high that you just want to kind of trial and error it. Like you're not chalking up the season, but you're almost just like, listen, he's the future. Let's let him get his, get the icks out, get the issues out through trial and error, and then we move forward. So I guess it just depends. I haven't really seen EJ Colson, and it's different live in camp, seeing the guys. Mackenzie made a lot of mistakes his freshman year, like in camp, but he also, he made a lot of plays where we're like, nobody on our roster can make that play. Nobody on our roster thinks to make that play. So it's like, you just got to, you kind of have to see that. So if EJ Colson is doing that, then yeah, if we're at QB3, realistically,
we're probably not going to, man.
Yeah,
I don't bust.
Yeah, it is. And I think if it's injuries or for whatever reason we get to that point, we just got to kind of move forward and, again, build to next year. It sucks to say that, but that's just kind of what you do because it's a quarterback's game at the end of the day.
Yeah. And what
gives us that best chance. So if we're down to QB3, again, unless EJ Colson is just a freak show stud that we just don't know, then I don't think he's going to be able to, sustain the season.
Yeah, and we had mentioned just before you came on, Trey, that we mentioned that Maryland game where KZ made his debut, right? And obviously we and Roger rightfully mentioned we literally fumbled that game away. But yeah. I remember literally saying on social media after that game, I was like, obviously he made his mistakes, but like it was very clear that like Mackenzie Milton was like born to play Scott Frost's offense, right? Like at that time, right? And when you look at our QB situation going into this season, and you look at the makeup that KJ Jefferson has, it's just like you look at a player like that, and it just seems like, with the comparisons to past quarterbacks that Gus has had, obviously Cam Newton being, one of the bigger ones, both literally and figuratively. It just does seem like he's the type of player that was just kind of born to play in Gus Malzahn's offense. And I mentioned his stats earlier. I mean, to talk about KJ a little further, I mean, he is the Arkansas career record holder in passing completions, completion percentage, passing yards, passing touchdowns, total plays, and total touchdowns. So, I mean, he's got experience, that's for dang sure. And that's, in the SEC in a very tough conference. I mean, I think the expectations for him are rightfully extremely high, and we're going to go as far this season as KJ takes us. And hopefully that's real far, which means that he stays healthy the whole way through.
Agreed.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Gus has said multiple times, because KJ isn't able to be hit, and obviously he shouldn't be in camp right now, right?
Don't touch him.
But yeah, his no touchy. His intangibles, right? Which are what really makes him special, which is using his size to get out of bad situations. I mean, it reminds me a lot of Blake Bortles, because he was. Mm-hmm. If you guys remember Blake Bortles, he would bowl people over. I mean, he literally was not afraid to hit someone. Neither was JRP, but JRP didn't have Blake Bortles' size, right? Yeah, so exactly. that was a little different. But the other thing is we're talking about Ja'Cory Brown. He's 6'4", 220. So he's also that mold of a quarterback that Gus Malzahn is looking for. And EJ Colson also was one of those running quarterbacks. And I believe, didn't you say, Trey, that you watched him play in high school one time?
Yeah, he's good. He's really good. I just, again,
like potential starting quarterback for a Power 4 team?
Yes. I just, again, relative to the question, I don't know if he'll be ready as an 18-year-old, but I think next year he should be challenging for that starting role, comfortably challenging for it. I just think, again, it's a lot to ask for with the expectations we have this season. It'll be a lot to ask for an 18-year-old to be like, hey, come in and lead us to a conference championship berth to compete for a conference championship. I just think that's hard for anybody to ask for a freshman.
Well, let's just hope we're not in that position. All right, moving on to running backs. Projected depth. Let's go with the top 4 running backs, because I think there may be more variability in that than we think. So right now, those top 4 would probably be RJ Harvey, Penny Boone, Miles Montgomery, and obviously Johnny Richardson, right? We haven't been talking much about Johnny Richardson, and I've kind of opined and said that I think that Johnny may be giving us, in between him and X in the slot, he may give us another option there where we can get creative in the middle of the field with having both of those guys, instead of kind of knowing who's getting the ball pretty much when Johnny Richardson was in there, as far as the tendency is concerned, and how he's getting the ball. And with X was kind of the same way. We knew when he lined up certain formations, he was getting the ball. Defenses know those tendencies. If we have 2 of those people, it's almost like having, utilizing a pass catching tight end at that point, right? Because you don't know which one you're going to get. You get them open in space and they're gone. So we know that Johnny Richardson will be used on the field. I don't think, you heard, and what Gus likes to do is run through the A gap with an inside zone. Miles Montgomery talked about that this week. that doesn't work well with Johnny Richardson because he's just not big enough to sustain his run after contact. But why don't you give us a review of what RJ did last year? Penny Boone, who's come in with a lot of fanfare, Miles Montgomery, and Johnny Richardson. All four of them averaged over 6 yards per carry, which is crazy to think about, right? Considering who we were playing, you've got four. I don't know of any running back room in the country that has four running backs that are averaging 6 yards per carry. I mean, that's just ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, that's a crazy stat line. When I was looking at the stats of these guys last season, like that's what stood out to me. I was like, just wow, okay, so 6.3, 7.1, 6.9. Like it's just like it's crazy that they all four of them averaged over 6 yards per carry. So all of them,
and they weren't playing against our defense doing that. They were playing against opposing Big 12 defenses.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, you're right. They weren't scrimmage games by any means. I mean, certainly against big boy defenses, they were doing all that. I mean, it does feel like this running back room, I think you're right, Roger, is one of the deepest in the country and probably the most versatile in the country. Each of them provide a little bit of something different. I would say RJ Harvey and Penny Boone are like kind of the clear 1-2 of that group, but Miles Montgomery, Johnny Richardson, I think those two guys each provide something more of a specialist type role in the running back room where you kind of expect Montgomery to get some third down and some goal line carries. He's kind of considered to be more of a bowling ball of a back to try to break through the goal line. Might be a touchdown vulture for a couple of our top guys, but starting with RJ Harvey and Penny Boone for that matter, but RJ Harvey and Penny Boone both had over 1,400 yards from scrimmage last year. Excuse me. Rushing yards. I should really qualify that by saying actual rushing yards. Both of them had over 1,400 rushing yards. So it's kind of rare in college football in general to have two running backs that have achieved 1,400 yards the year before. And so there's only one football on the field. So, how are those yards going to be distributed this year? I think we're going to be leaning even heavier into the run game, and those guys are going to get theirs. We could have 2,000-yard rushers for the on the same UCF team for the first time in many years. I think the last time we did that, if I'm not mistaken, was maybe Bryn Harvey and whoever his running back mate was that year. It might have been. Regardless, it was at least over a decade ago, so that's really interesting. And so RJ Harvey, just to give some quick stats, I already mentioned 1,416 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, 6.3 average on the ground. Overall, though, with his with some receiving in there, 238 yards receiving, also a touchdown there. So just overall, he, was a beast for us last year. There's no expectations of him slowing down, except, his expectations are, I think, rising this season. He had over 226 rushing attempts last year. So I would expect that number to go down as he, projects to be potentially, a pretty good NFL back. And so
can I ask you a quick question, Ben?
Sure.
So right now, RJ Harvey is listed at 5'9", 205. Do you really think he's only 205 pounds?
Not from the pictures I've seen that he looks like
he's the junior Hulk.
Yeah, he looks
like Hulk smash Hulk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he looks like he has just been putting in a lot of work in the weight room. There's no doubt about that. And the nutrition center for that matter, because he legit looks like a professional wrestler, really. It's crazy.
Trey, from your perspective, think about this guy. You've got RJ Harvey, He's got some burst. He's got up to speed. He's made his cuts. Now he's headed towards the safety. How do you handle a dude that's I mean, I know how I would handle it, but I'd like to hear it from you, someone who's played the game, like, and I remember what your playing weight was. Like, how do you handle a guy like that to try to tackle him at full speed, in the open field? I mean, do you just go for his knees? Like,
yeah, he reminds me a lot of a guy we played at Temple who just rock, like those kind of players, those kind of running backs. You just if you're gonna hit them high, you better hit them before they make eye contact with you. Like, you need to hit them before they see you. Just because the way he's compact. He might be 205, 210, but you're talking maybe 5% body fat. Like, he has no fat.
Maybe.
Yeah, he's shredded. So, yeah, I mean, you just got to wrap him up low, realistically. But again, he has leverage because he's not 6 foot, 6'1" like a Kevin Smith. He was a tall running back. He's low center of gravity, so it's just hard to get leverage on them. So I mean,
when you watched him even last year, right? And he was big last year, but comparatively speaking to this offseason, it's a whole nother level.
Yeah, I haven't seen any pictures, but again, he was a big running back last year, and imagine he at his height, he's 5'9". So kind of to give some context behind this. Penny Boone is 6'1", 242.
I was about to say that. Like, you imagine RJ comes out of the game, he just beats you up, and now you're bringing in a guy that's 6'1", 250, basically. Like, who also can run away from you. Like, the running back depth is insane this year. We just got to 2 guys.
Miles Montgomery, 5'11", 205, right?
Yeah.
So
I think, like, the benefit of this room and, like, the skills, kind of like what Ben was saying, I think Johnny Richardson has a role. It's not going to be
right
inside the tackles. He's going to be, I wouldn't say a gadget player, but when he's in the game, he's going to have touch it. You have to know where he's at. I don't think that's really going to change because I just don't see another way for him on the field unless it's like you said, Roger, just strictly a slot guy. And I don't see that.
Or tunnel screens. I could see him on screens.
Yeah, but again, that's how manufactured touches. So he's going to get the ball.
Yeah. I think for me, like, no. I was just gonna say, you have him as a screen guy, right? And the other option that you have for him is like a pitch, right? So he comes from his position where he would be setting up like a tunnel screen, and he comes around and goes to a pitch or a reverse. Yeah. And that's, I think, what you try to confuse the defenses with that, depending on how they're set up.
I agree. But Ben was talking to like RJ's, how many carries he had. I think the beauty in it is, like you said, it's going to save his body. He's not going to get 226. He'll probably be at like 130 to 150 maybe. But I think his efficiency is going to go up. And you're talking about already crazy efficient. Like 6, I don't know, he was at 6 yards a carry last year? That's insane. Yeah. But now you're going to cut
that many touches.
Exactly.
Like, that's the thing. Like,
and that's why I say if he got 7 yards a carry, 7.5, I wouldn't be surprised because he's going to be a lot more fresh. His body's going to feel a lot better. And I think that's the beauty in bringing in a Penny Boone is it takes off that workload. I mean, it was noticeable last year when RJ wasn't in, like, there was a drop-off. It wouldn't be – I wouldn't say significant, but there was a drop-off in just how we ran the ball. And I think that's why Gus kind of ran him into the ground. I don't blame him. But I just think that I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a uber efficient season for him. And I'd hope so for both of them, him and Penny Boone.
Yeah, I think it's got to be.
Yeah,
sure.
It has to be.
Well, I mean, look, the way, and I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench into this, and I didn't even mention Stacey Gage, by the way, who is ranked the number 3 best freshman running back this year. By the way, ranked number 3 best freshman running back in the entire country, and who will most likely not get any touches unless it's a garbage time type situation. And he's 5'11" as a freshman, true freshman, 5'11", 210 pounds. Seriously, think about our former running backs and what they look like, other than Bowser, right? Like, Bowser was he was a machine too, right? But like, think about what our past running backs were. this running back room, I honestly think, I know everybody's talking about Penny Boone. He's, he ran for the 1,400 yards, but he was also in a different conference, right? So I hate to be that guy, like the G5 versus Power 4 kind of guy, but I think what last year taught us is from a depth perspective and average size of linebacker and lineman, there is a difference even between the AAC and where he played last year, right? So I'm not taking anything away from him, but I would not be surprised if Miles Montgomery got more playing time than just goal line. And if not, Miles does have 2 years. So he'll be back next year. Obviously, RJ won't be. Penny Boone will be. He will be back next year. So already for next year, you've got Penny Boone, you've got Miles Montgomery, you've got Stacey Gage, and there were some other highly recruited running backs that we have on the roster, and that's not even including who the folks were that we were bringing in and recruiting for next year. So this running back room is going to be stacked for a while. But I don't know.
With this, realistically, these guys came in, they know RJ is the one. I think when he leaves, there's probably going to be shakeup because if we bring in another big time running back, somebody's going to end up leaving. Just because the top of the depth chart is open. Like Penny Boone transferred in knowing that this is RJ's running back room.
Oh yeah. I mean,
so like you kind of fall in line knowing that. When going into next spring, and I know we're talking way ahead, it's an open room. So guys are going to be like, I think I should be the number one back. I think I should be the number one back. And once that settles out, guys are going to be like, oh, well, I can't waste time here. I need to go somewhere where I can play. Now I've already, quote unquote, wasted a year, this which would be this season, because they're not going to get most of these guys, again, it's the same thing. It's similar to quarterbacks. You don't get better getting 50 carries a season. You get better playing football. You get looked at in the NFL playing football in most situations. Now, when you talk about like old school Alabama where Derrick Henry's third string, yeah, you can wait your turn and just ride it out till you're just ready. I don't think that's the case.
Well, Alabama, the difference between Bama was, they were expected to be in the national championship every year, so they have the spotlight expectation every year, right? So you're going to get your stage if you wait it out, right? Because most of them played their junior and senior years. Now, UCF
transfer portal too, like that's just a whole different piece as far as it as well.
But even like the last few seasons that had the transfer portal, right, where they didn't have to sit a year and all of that other stuff, you didn't see those guys leave because they were going to get their shot at the NFL as a feature back, right? And Nick Saban, he didn't promise it to them, but these guys are heavy hitters. Now our guys, it's a little bit different, right? Our roster isn't all 5 stars or a vast majority 5 stars, right? So since we don't have that, yes, we're expected to compete for a Big 12 championship every year, as we should with the recruiting that we're doing now. Again, number 1 in the Big 12, and for next year's class, number 1 in the Big 12, and have increased the average star rating each year, right? So I expect us to continue to compete for the Big 12 championship. That being said, and by extension, the college football playoff slot that goes along with that. However, it's a different ball game. You're not going to pretty much be guaranteed to be in the championship like Nick Saban's teams were, right? So they are going to be more likely to leave because the pieces around them are moving too. They're not guaranteed, the same caliber or quality of team every year. So I think it's more that than anything else. But even then, I mean, if you can't win with the running backs that we have, I don't know what to tell you, assuming the defense stacks up again, let alone the wide receivers.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that, I understand that we're in a different era than we were 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago or a decade ago. But like, what an amazing advantage a guy like Stacey Gage has, highly recruited guy. And he gets to go into a running back room that has a guy like RJ Harvey, has somebody who's rushed for 1,400 yards in Penny Boone, and then you've got you've got these versatile players. Miles Montgomery has done it as well. Johnny Richardson. You got these guys that you can learn from, and I understand that everything that you just talked about, Trey, is like that's the mentality of the modern college athlete. If I don't get mine right away, then I'm gonna look for greener pastures. But I mean, I hope the younger guys that are getting to feed off the experience of our top running backs. I mean, really do.
Well, I think I do, Ben, to your point. I think it's a little bit different with RJ because think about RJ's journey, right? RJ started as a quarterback at Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
Transferred here, had to learn the running back position, then got and fought his way to the starting role. We had some really good running backs while he was here too, right? And now he is number one, obviously, right? And should be for that reason. But if you're talking about guys to look up to and to do it the right way and why he's a team captain, it's because he took that journey and he's excelled and he's gotten better and better every year. And just to kind of give some context, just to throw one running back out there, because we've had good sized running backs over the years, right? Storm Johnson. I don't know if you guys remember him.
Of course.
His playing weight during college was 6'1", 216, Loganville, Georgia guy. So, Trey, you should know him really well. 6'1", 216. Then you think about Latavius Murray, still playing in the NFL right now. He was over 6 foot tall and 230 pounds. And when he was playing, his big thing was he would run upright. Right. And that was when, Adrian Peterson and those guys were first making big backs a thing. And, you looked at him and how successful he was. These guys are that size and they're playing like the smaller guys. So they have the technique to get low and guard against those tackles. You were talking about RJ Harvey. His center of mass, if he sees a tackle coming, is not going to be fully stretched out to have a big target. You're gonna have, and his legs are massive. So when you're talking about yards after contact, right, he's going to get low and try to get as low as possible so you can't get at his legs. And when he is got his legs, he's pumping them at such a rate that it's going to be hard to grab hold of him because he's so strong that he can get out of arm tackles. So you better hope that you're able to do that. The other part about that is one of the changes for defenders this year is the type of tackling that you can do. You can no longer hip tackle, right? So you can't hold on to his legs and then turn because of injuries. So it's going to be really interesting when someone can get low like that, has speed, has a massive upper body. It's almost like a tank coming at you. Like how do you tackle somebody like that unless you're coming at them from an angle? So it's going to be really, really interesting. I think that all of these players that we've mentioned have the ability, if you watch them, they are getting low and they have the ability to run through tackles. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to the tackling, you have to take them at an angle, just leverage wise. You can't, if they're coming straight up in the hole, you almost have to just take that tackle and absorb it and just kind of, you're going to fall backwards, but you just got to get them to the ground. Like that's just math. Like he's bigger, stronger, better center of gravity. You're probably not going to beat his leverage without literally going to your knees to the ground. So it's one of those things. They teach it to you, just kind of absorb it, wrap up, and then wait for help or just kind of get them to the ground. So this is why defense is so hard to play nowadays. A lot of the rules are catered to offense because it's more exciting to watch, to be honest. Scoring
all right.
is more exciting.
So let's talk about this. We're going to go around the horn here. Ben, what's your running back depth projection coming out of camp?
I think it's pretty clear cut. RJ Harvey, clear number one, and then Penny Boone behind him. I think those guys are going to be the majority of the carries, and I see Miles Montgomery and Johnny Richardson as situational running backs. Doesn't mean that some games they might get 10, 12 touches or something like that. But I see both of those guys as more situational, and that's the way I see the depth going.
All right, Alan.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any big surprises here in the running back room. I mean, I agree with exactly what Ben said. It's going to, I think, go in that order. Johnny Richardson as a potential slot receiver, with X is interesting. I think is an interesting possibility that could happen, just to be able to find him a role, a guy that's kind of stayed loyal to UCF, has had multiple chances to transfer now, and I thought he would have been the number one guy that was transferring out of here just after the last couple of seasons with, getting overpassed by Bowser, then Harvey and everything. But yeah, I kind of envision it, the running back room going that same way with, as expected, not really any big surprises.
All right, Trey, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think if you look at kind of what Gus's the running back room, it's always pretty much set. Like you have that one guy, and then everybody else has the role. This year, we just have two guys, and then everybody else has the role. So I think it's kind of that. Like I think when he first came, it was what, Bowser, and then RJ fell a little bit behind, and then Johnny Richardson had a role. Then RJ gets that role, and then Johnny Richardson and all the other guys fall in line. I think that's the same thing now. So I don't think it's going to change.
All right. As for me, I do think, obviously RJ Harvey. I think that Penny will pick up some of those carries, but I do think Miles Montgomery is going to push him, and I wouldn't be surprised if Miles Montgomery gets more carries than what Penny Boone does this year, because either A, goal line, or B, we run up against defenses where he is better suited for that style of running between the tackles. And he's a very patient runner, having watched him at Cincinnati. I watched him last year. I saw him play us. I saw him play other teams. He's a very patient runner. So for a zone read style running back, he's very, very well suited and well versed in how to do that. Although his was an outside zone and now this is an inside zone. I personally think that he's not going to be one trick pony, and I wouldn't be surprised if RJ gets the vast majority of the carries, if Miles Montgomery doesn't step up and get more carries than what Penny Boone does. So I guess that's my first hot take for this year. Johnny Richardson, I think he's used more in tandem with X to get either one of those guys in space, because if you get either one of those guys in space and trucking, they're going to make guys miss, and they're pretty fast with their cuts, in and out of their cuts. So I think that's their strengths, and I think that's going to give defenses something to have to worry about, not just the pass catching tight end. And I think that KJ is going to be able to use the short field a little bit more than what we've had the ability to do in the past. So that's my hot take for early season hot take. And Ben, I know that you had a question that you were dying to ask everybody on the running backs. So why don't you go ahead and ask that question?
Yeah, before we move on from running backs, I just wanted to, we're talking a lot about, rightfully so, we're talking about a lot about RJ Harvey, and just talking about this offense in general being very run heavy this year. And you just mentioned KJ Jefferson. I think that's going to take a lot of rushing yards right there. I hope he doesn't have to rush for too many yards because I don't want him too exposed. But just a general question. So the number is 1141. So 1,141 yards. That's the amount of yards that RJ Harvey is away from Alex Haynes, our number two all-time rusher here at UCF. Honestly, one of my all-time favorite UCF players. He's an early 2000s guy. I went to school with him. Alex Haynes is a great person, and he was a hell of an athlete for UCF.
Heck of an athlete. We're a clean show. We're E for everyone, Ben.
Yes, that's right. And he's only 6 rushing touchdowns away from passing Alex Haynes as well. So 1,141 rushing yards is a lot to expect for a guy in this crowded of a backfield, along with KJ Jefferson as well. But if he is able to pass Alex Haynes, where does RJ Harvey sit amongst the great UCF running backs of that we've seen at this school, because I mean the list is great. And I'll just run down quickly the top 10 because they're all names that we recognize. I mean, Kevin Smith, Alex Haynes, Greg McCrae, Adrian Killens, Bryn Harvey, who I mentioned earlier, Latavius Murray, of course. RJ Harvey is number 7 right now, and then the late great Otis Anderson, number 8. Johnny Richardson is actually number 9, and then Storm Johnson. So, some of that is limited.
That's crazy to think about how many of those running backs you listed were within
the last 5 years.
Very recent guys.
That's crazy considering, George O'Leary ball was 3 yards in a cloud of dust and ball control. So
I think the reason why that is though he used multiple backs, and we're going to see that this season. So if RJ is able to get over 1,150 yards this season with this backfield, I don't know. I think you kind of have to put him up there in the top 5 best running backs that we've ever seen at the school.
Ben, do you have the sorry, Alan. Do you have the rushing stats for QB for last year?
Rushing stats for QB for last year?
Yeah. Like how many yards?
JRP and all that?
Yeah. How many yards?
I'll pull that up while you guys. Yeah, I'll pull that up.
Because I'm gonna put something out there for you to kind of consider when you said that 1,100 yards, right?
Yeah.
RJ had 1,400 yards last year. So do I think he's capable of it? What's that?
So JRP probably had around 500 if I had to guess. I know the year before that he had around like 800. And I'm gonna get a hell of a year.
I'm gonna guess it's more than that. However, my point that I was going to make with that is KJ Jefferson is not a run first quarterback. He's a quarterback who's good in the pocket and can climb the ladder and can escape and then get you yards. So I think that's going to free up a lot of touches for the running backs and a lot of yards for the running backs, which may, even with that backfield that we have, I think that may open the door for the running backs to get those yards, or for RJ Harvey to get those yards. So, Ben, do you have the number?
Yeah. So I got to remind you that JRP only played 10 games last season, so he had 505 rushing yards. The season prior, though, he had 862 rushing yards because he played 13 games that year. So the season prior, 2022, he had 862 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns.
Do you see Timmy McClain's on there to see what his number looks like, other than running backwards for 150 yards before throwing the ball?
I just looked up looked up the individual, but Timmy McClain had he had rushing yards. He had
200 maybe.
He had like 100 rushing yards, 104.
Okay, so if we think about that, the range is going to be between 600 and 800 yards.
Right,
that's going to become available now for this running back stable. So at 6 yards per carry, you're talking about another 100 touches essentially for these guys to spread around. So
KJ doesn't rush at all, though.
Well, yeah, but that's what I said, for these guys to spread around. I think that KJ, again, and I'm going to say this again, don't expect JRP out of KJ. I expect KJ to only pick up yards when he has to pick them up. I also think he's going to check down before unless it's wide open and he's got a read where someone's crashing down and it's an obvious 10 or 15 yards, he's not going to run the ball. He's going to stand back there. He's going to move around the pocket and then maybe open it up. There's not going to be as much design play calls for that.
Just for context, I mean, last season at Arkansas, he had 447 rushing yards. The 2 years prior to that, though, he had over 640 rushing yards each year. So, I mean, he eats up the yards on the ground.
Yeah,
the broken plays mostly.
It's hard because, you say JRP with 500 yards, they free up. A lot of JRP's runs were from scrambling pass plays. Like, they weren't run plays like that. Oh, since JRP loses these 500 yards, we just give them to the running back. It's more, they were pass plays, and JRP's like, oh, first read, I'm out of here. Like that's kind of how he got a lot of his yards, even the year before. So I think it's going to be almost impossible for RJ. If the way I think he's going to split up the touches, it's going to be almost impossible for him to get 1,100 unless he's literally averaging probably 8, 9, 10 yards a carry. I just don't see them leaning on him so heavily that he can get there because, again, you have another 1,400-yard guy. Granted, it was in another conference, but he's shown the capability of being a workload. So I think it's going to be hard to get to that.
I mean, I'm just saying if he does though, like,
if he does, that's
one of our best running backs ever. Like if he does,
going back to your original question, Ben, where do you guys think he ranks? I mean, considering he only really has been playing running back consistent touches the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think if he breaks the 1,100 mark and gets to what you said, I think that was number 3 all time.
He would be number 2 all
number 2. Honestly, I wouldn't say top 5. I would say he would be number 2 all time, in my opinion, after Kevin Smith. I don't think anyone's ever going to top Kevin Smith. It would take such an effort to, go where he had 2,400, 2,500 yards that one season. So that would be, non-human for someone to do that. But I think he ends up number 2. I mean, first of all, when you consider that 2/3 of the consistent time that he was playing running back were in the Big 12, 2 out of the 3 years. Secondly, like 1,400 yards that he had last year, I think was, 3rd best single season in UCF history. And then the fact that he ends up number 2 potentially in touchdowns and rushing yards while doing the Big 12. I mean, along with other multiple records that he broke as far as like over 100-yard rushing games, yards per carry, all types of stuff. Not only doing it like with speed, but, physicality as well, not just kind of like an Adrian Kellens. He catches a 80-yard run and is off. I mean, he's really versatile in the type of runs that he gets. So I think he's already top 5 now if he didn't play another down at UCF. And I think if he surpasses 1,100, he gets to number 2. And I do think he does that. I know we have all this versatility and we have all these names and options, but I don't know. Gus reminds me of that kind of stubbornness in the running back room. He's a very big and just playing the same guy over and over. So short of RJ getting injured,
he broke it up with Bowser. He broke it up with Bowser.
He did, but it was not really though.
He leaned on Bowser. Like
Bowser had 16 touchdowns in his last season. Like he went to him a lot. Like I mean I know
because we didn't have a red zone threat except for Bowser. Bowser was the tough yards guy. That's why his average went down, especially the last year. But he'd also said, if you guys remember, he made a promise to Bowser that if he came back, that he would protect him a little bit for the NFL, because he knew he was going to be a senior to go to the NFL draft, and he wanted to make sure that he protected him a little bit. I could see the same thing happening with RJ Harvey. You know what I mean? The big thing and I'm going to ask this question to you guys too, and this may be blasphemy to UCF fans, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Kevin Smith played in the conference that he played in, mostly Conference USA, right? If you put Kevin Smith against Big 12 defenses or Power 4 defenses, is he now? Granted, we didn't have an offense outside of Kevin Smith that year that he ran for 2,400 yards, and I think that's part of the reason why he didn't do as well, or didn't last as long. Not do as well, last as long in the NFL. Plus, he played for Detroit, which doesn't help matters. But when you're thinking about that, if we were to put Kevin Smith into this offense today, would he still be that number 1 in your mind, or would someone like RJ Harvey be that number 1 person in your side? And I know that's blasphemous to ask, but I'm going to ask the question anyway.
I think it is.
I think easily he would be, because I mean, it wasn't like he was just a college. He got drafted in the 3rd round of the NFL and ran for almost 1,000 yards his rookie year in the NFL on the Detroit Lions. So it wasn't like he was just some college talent and that's it. And I mean, injuries cut his NFL career short. And like you said, he, got a lot of mileage in college, which probably also shortened his career. But the guy had if he was a 3rd round pick and played in the NFL, he had the talent to play in the Power 4. Like, hands, not even a question in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Smith, like, he was one of a, like, he could do everything. I mean, you're saying Big 12, but he ran all over Texas, and that was prime Texas. Like, I think he went for like 150 against in 2007. Like, I think that was the first game in the bounce house, right?
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, like, he ran all over them. So, like, he could have easily, especially, and that was with really nobody else around him. Now, I'm not discrediting him, but he was the offense. Like, it was Kevin Smith or we're punting the ball. Like, that's what it was. So now with other guys around him, I think he would. I mean, I'm not going to go and say that RJ is better than him. I think RJ could be too, though. Like, I agree with you, Alan. I think he's probably a solidified top 5 guy just because, again, for me, it's the ability to do everything. I think that's what made Kevin Smith great. I think that's what makes RJ Harvey great. I think that's what separates him from, Adrian Killins, because AK was like a home run hitter at all times.
Yeah.
He couldn't really just grind it out. Like, RJ Harvey can grind it out. RJ Harvey is extremely explosive. He can make you miss. Can catch. Like, he can do everything. So I think he's better than him in that aspect. It's just, I don't know if he's going to get the 1,100. But I just pulled up when Isaiah Bowser, his senior year, and he ran for 200 carries, and RJ had 120, and JRP had 100.
That's what I'm saying. I just think Gus goes with what he knows. He just reminds me of that, like, stubborn kind of, like, O'Leary type of mold where, like, I know we're all expecting RJ's carries to go down this year because we have all this talent and depth in the RB room, but I think it will go down, but I don't think it'll be as much as everyone expects. Like, I honestly, if you look back at the end of the year, and I wouldn't be shocked if RJ dominated the running back room again and had, like, whatever the split was last year, 80%. I really wouldn't be surprised. Like, I don't think that will happen, but I wouldn't look back and be like, oh, I'm shocked that Penny Boone didn't get a ton of playing time. I could just see it happening that way. I know he probably does want to protect him and give him, less carries to, make him sustainable for the future, but I don't think it's going to be as much of a decline as we're all expecting.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. Right. Looking at these numbers, he might do it.
I'm going to throw some stats at you real quick.
Answer the question.
Kevin Smith. No, you guys are talking about RJ. I want to go back to the Kevin Smith thing.
He averaged answer the Kevin Smith question, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, Lynn, let me give you these stats and then you answer the question. All right. So Kevin Smith, 2005, 4.7 yards per carry. He was a freshman, he got 249 attempts. 2006, 4.5 yards per carry, 206 attempts. Junior year, he didn't play his senior year, 450 attempts. So he basically played 2 running backs worth in one season. 5.7 yards per carry. So it's actually that 5.7 is a little bit higher than what I expected. But again, Conference USA competition, not 6 yards plus per carry against the Big 12. And I'm not arguing for or against Kevin Smith. It's just to flavor the question. So
you got to put context.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, well, I think that put some context to it. Yeah, I think that context that you're hinting at there, Trey, is that Kevin Smith just didn't. Like, if you put Kevin Smith on the talent of this team, this offense, like, I think he's, like, even better than what we saw back in 2005 to 2007. I mean, I remember back in 2005, I remember being at the Citrus Bowl for his first game, like when he debuted as a freshman, and I was like, holy crap, like, who is this kid? Like, he was unbelievable on a team that, that we were so excited when we finally won our first game in a year plus, and like when I just remember seeing him for the first time, like, whoa, our team is garbage, but that kid is something different.
Our team is garbage, but that kid is
we were a drinking school with a football problem back then. That's for sure. I mean, it's I think you put, in my opinion, just seeing the 2 players seeing the players that we're talking about, and being at those games, watching Kevin Smith those years ago, I think that you put this type of talent around him, and he's actually even better than what we saw back in 2007. He's obviously not going to get 450 carries. We know that's
insane.
Yeah, that's just a given. Like, we understand that he's not going to get 2,500 yards. Like, he's not going to get the stats that he got in 2007. But I think the quality of player that you'll see, I mean, I think his level would raise even further. Just to maybe your point though, Roger, like maybe he doesn't get the chance to actually see it if we are UCF of today, right? Like if he's coming out in 2022 as opposed to 2005, like, maybe, I think he was a 2-star guy coming out of high school, right? Like, so obviously we found a diamond in the rough with him. Just what we saw there as in his career, I feel like you put him on this team and he's still that great player, if not even a better player. He's in the Heisman Trophy, conversation. Like he's that good.
Consensus number one, we're saying Kevin Smith then.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, for one further thing for context, in the history of the entire college football, Kevin Smith still has the third most rushing yards for a single season, only behind Barry Sanders and Melvin Gordon. So, I mean, it's not like, just because he was facing conference today. I mean, we're talking.
I don't even know who Melvin Gordon is, but Barry Sanders was an OSU Cowboy.
Yeah, Melvin Gordon. He was an NFL. He was on the Chargers for a long time.
Yeah. He was on the Broncos too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
No idea who that is.
But yeah, I mean, Kevin Smith, like to be the third in the history of the sport, dating back to the early 1900s or whatever. I mean, that's ridiculous. And when I look at the top 10 here, there's only one other group of 5 school in there. So it's not as if like every group of 5 running back is just like, oh, it's, this is easy to do. We can just run for 2,000 yards because we're playing crappy group of 5 competition. So, I mean, it's what he did was a special feat that obviously in general, he's one of 3 running backs in the history of sport have ever rushed over 2,500 yards. So that doesn't happen that often, if ever.
450 carries, like that's insane. They literally ran him.
That might be a record for motor carries. I wouldn't be surprised.
And how many games did they play that year?
I think it was a record back then. I think it was a record.
I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't a record still.
14 games that he played in.
So he's averaging like 30 carries a game is insane.
If it was a record then, it's definitely a record still. Like
it's gotta be.
Running
anything, we're just cutting it down now and making more committee. Like that's just 450 carries in 14 games.
Alan, see if you can find that stat. But yeah, I'd say he's number 1, RJ number 2 sounds like, or 3 consensus. I still think Latavius Murray too. He didn't get as many opportunities as some of these other guys. I think he was still as good. But guys like Storm Johnson. I mean, I think about Storm Johnson. He only played for what, like one or 2 seasons.
Years, I think.
Yeah, and he was a phenomenal running back. I mean, he laid the wood to Penn State. He was a great player. He was also versatile. Obviously, things kind of went sideways when he got to the NFL, but he would have been drafted a lot higher than he was if he didn't have the off the field things going on. But yeah, all right. So are we saying RJ Harvey number 2 or number 3?
I think he's number 2 as long as he has the season that we expect him to have.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think he has to pass Alex Haynes for number 2 all-time rushing yards, but he has to put together. If he puts together a quality season, and we have a good season on the field, meaning record-wise, like I think he's easily number 2 running back in UCF history.
So Kevin Smith does hold the all-time record for carries, and it's by a large margin.
No,
I thought so.
By a lot.
The number
in one season is insane.
Number 2 all-time. There's only 3 running backs ever that have had over 400 carries. It's Kevin Smith at 450. Number 2 is Marcus Allen with 403. Then Troy Davis at 402, and then Derrick Henry's number 4 with 395.
That's crazy.
So he holds the record by almost 47 carries. So I don't think that.
I remember that Derrick Henry season when I think that was his last year at Alabama.
Yeah,
I was like, this is insane the way they're running him. into the ground.
And he still had a great NFL career, or still is having a great NFL
Still
career.
having a great NFL career.
Well, there's a reason why he was self-medicating after a season like that. Let's just put it that way. And it's still self-medicating, allegedly. I don't know. But yeah, Derrick Henry was a phenomenal running back. But even to be named in Marcus Allen, I mean, come on. But
that was in 1981, so they're not running them like they used to.
That was a great year. I'm just going to put that out there. 1981 was a great year. Great things happened in 1981.
Roger was born.
Yep. All right. So it sounds like consensus number 2 for RJ if he has the season that we're expecting him to have. Let's go ahead and talk about something that we have a lot of depth at too. Wide receiver. You've got Kobe Hudson, obviously, is going to be our wide receiver 1. And I listened to his interview the other day, and he's got the right attitude. Like his attitude, his mental mindset, everything. He's excited about the season. Like last year, he was kind of quiet. Gerard Baker did all the talking, but he articulated himself very well. I was very impressed with what I heard out of Kobe Hudson. You've got Xavier Townsend, obviously. X is coming back. Sorry. And then you got Trent Whittemore, who's been making some noise and is supposed to be getting a lot better. Remember, he's a Florida transfer. That guy is also a legacy UCF player because his dad played for us and was a pretty good wide receiver for us. Then you've got Jacoby Jones, and I saw him today at one of his pressers, and I was telling Ben before we came on here, he is like gonna rival RJ Harvey for a guy who is like swole. I mean, for a wide receiver, he is swole. Right. So I expect you've been hearing his name in camp early quite a bit. Javarius Johnson, also a highly touted, talented transfer wide receiver. You've got Gerard Baker, who's been here for a while, and Chauncey Magwood, we've heard a lot. So there's a lot of choices when it comes to wide receiver. Ben, why don't you give us a little bit of history on some of these guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, first you mentioned Kobe Hudson. Obviously, he seems to be poised to be our first number 1 option wide receiver wise. One of the stats that kind of sticks out last season, and we've talked a lot about this with the running backs as far as yards per carry, but so he had 900 receiving yards last year. Kobe Hudson did. He had 8 touchdowns. All that's very impressive, but he had 20.5 yards per catch. So he was our clear deep ball threat, which, you could argue that, JRP wasn't the best deep ball thrower, right? So a lot of that was probably yards after the catch. I don't have that stat quite in front of me, but by the same token, I think what we saw last year was, we had a clear 1-2 punch, and Kobe Hudson was in some games, the top wide receiver for us. And I think this season he's just really poised to kind of have what I would consider a breakout season. I would not be surprised, if he had over 60 something catches this season, had over 1,000 yards receiving, and really just kind of was a focal point in the passing game for UCF. So I expect Kobe Hudson to be a top player in the wide receiver room for us. And then just moving on to what we consider to be kind of the number 2 guy as far as wide receivers go. Xavier Townsend is a guy that I feel like the last 2 camps, the last 2 fall camps, he seems to be a name that is hard for the coaches to avoid talking about. They always seem to talk about Xavier Townsend, and this camp is no different. I mean, I remember last season going into, the fall camp, all the pressers, each offensive coach was just mentioning his name. Right. So he seems to be impressing in this year's camp. I mean, Gus Malzahn seemed to be kind of going out of the way to talk about him every once in a while, like in some of the interviews that I've seen. I've not seen all of them from him so far, but last season, at 33 receptions, he has 325 yards. He was mostly used out of the slot. We also used Johnny Richardson a lot out of the slot and other guys too. So, he was used a little sparingly. 33 receptions, 325 yards. He had almost 10 yards per catch, and 3 touchdowns. So it wasn't that he, had this explosive year last year, but he did seem like one of those guys. He always has since he's been here. He just seems like that kind of, that guy that makes one guy miss and all of a sudden he's off to the races. So he's a type of player that seems like a serious home run threat. And I'll allow, Allen and other guys to talk about Whitmore, Jacoby Jones. I mean, they've been used relatively sparingly. Whitmore was here last season. He only had 3 receptions for 36 yards. He did play in all 13 games. He had 2 starts on the season. And then his career at Florida was used relatively sparingly. But as you said, he's not only a legacy here, but he's a pretty big guy as well. Is 6'4", 211, along with Jacoby Jones as well, is also somebody who is has got size at the wide receiver position. Jacoby Jones, 6'3", 228. That's what he's listed at. So he's probably bigger than that, 228.
Well, 6'3", 228, but like on a wide receiver frame at 6'3", 228. And I think you're right. I think he's bigger. I think I'm trying to remember the guy that was a few years ago. He didn't end up getting drafted, but he was a bigger guy too. Wasn't very fast, but like could catch anything against anybody.
Marvin Williams?
Yes.
He wasn't that big. Marlon,
he wasn't.
Marlon was short though. That's the thing.
Marlon wasn't
short guy.
6'3", 230.
He was like 5'10", maybe.
Yeah, 5'10", 5'11". He was thick, stocky guy, but he wasn't like 6'3", 230 is huge. Like that's bigger than a lot of guys in the NFL.
So
you're 10 pounds away from being a tight end at that point, right?
Right. Yeah. Since we're talking about Jacoby Jones, he spent his first 2 seasons at Ohio, so he has some eligibility left. So he's spent his career in the MAC, so obviously it's a step up in competition. Last season he was injured almost the whole season, so he only played in 3 games. But his he might have been a junior college transfer because it says his junior and senior year. I'm not 100% sure, but anyways, his junior year at Ohio, he had 777 yards. He had 45 reception. He played in all 14 games. He had 6 touchdowns. So he was used a little bit more in his 2 years ago at Ohio. So he's somebody that at a 17.3 yards per catch for him his junior year at Ohio. Like he's a guy that's probably considered as a home run threat as well.
Marlon Williams, 6 foot, 215 pounds is what he was listed at.
Yeah.
That's still pretty big. That's pretty big. I mean, it's not 6'4", 228, which I think he's heavier than 228. Like when I saw him at his presser today, like that dude was massive. His arms were like most people's legs that work out. He was a big dude.
Yeah. I think it's good that Gus has different body types in the room. Just because you want to have versatility. Again, you don't want to just have all short, fast guys. You want to have some guys that can go win those physical matchups outside. Especially when you talk about like Whittemore, 6'4", 211, 215. That's a big body type outside. Jacoby Jones, 6'3", 6'4", 228, allegedly 240, according to Roger. It's good to have that mixture because styles make fights, in my opinion. I think some corners struggle with bigger receivers. Some corners struggle with smaller receivers. That's one of the things, like, really the special corners can guard every type. Most guys have a weakness. They have a preference. So I think just having that flexibility gives you the option to really not pigeonhole yourself into one type of style. You can kind of do everything. So I think, again, the more I'm talking about this offense, we get to this O-line. If you guys are telling me this is a really good O-line, we should have a top 10 offense in the country. The way it sounds.
I mean, we were last year.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
We were last year. And Gus said that's the goal this year is to have a top 5 offense.
And again, the way we're talking about it, we should.
The biggest weakness we had in last year's offense was scoring touchdowns in the red zone. That was it. Everything else was pretty solid, and that's with JRP that was hobbled towards the last 3 or 4 games, and got hurt against Boise. And I mean, that still makes me mad. But whatever. Go ahead, Alan. You were going to say something. Sorry.
I think our offense is poised to be top 10, and it's well-rounded in a lot of ways. And the offensive line, at least the starters, should be solid. I know we'll get into that next, but I actually do think wide receiver, in my opinion, is not only our biggest weakness on offense, but our most questionable. I'm just not convinced until I see something like you talk about last year when we just lost a 4th-round NFL receiver in Javon Baker, and we're bringing back the other 2 from that receiver room in Hudson and Townsend, and like the wide receiver room still struggle with depth. Like literally no one else could get on the field, and it wasn't because like those 3 were so dominant, like just no one could see the field. They brought in that guy from Marshall, Corey Gamage, who had like 1,600 yards over his previous 2 seasons, was dominant, didn't even play a single snap at UCF. Like I've just seen a lot of UCF receiver transfers and high school prospects lately turn out bust. And I'm not saying that will happen this year. I think they've brought in a lot more talented receivers as far as freshman recruits. Like we've already talked a lot.
Bradell Richardson.
Bradell Richardson, those guys. But like until I see it in the field, like I think uncharacteristically at UCF, it's been a weak wide receiver room since that 2020 class when Marvin Williams left and Trey Nixon and Jacob Harris and those guys. Like since then, it just hasn't been the same. Like the top line guys like Javon and Kobe have been good, but the depth has been very, very lacking. And I know Jacoby Jones and Javarius Johnson and these guys look good on paper, but until I see it like in a new system with new teammates, new quarterback, new coach, like I'm just not convinced yet. And I think there's a much better chance this year compared to the last few years that these guys step up. But like, I mean, we saw it last year. I mean, look at all the transfers essentially were busts. I mean, Trent Whittemore had 3 catches. The Kentucky kid that we just talked about had 4 or 5 catches. So I'm interested to see, but going back to at least, this year's roster with Whittemore, he's actually widely known in the locker room as like our best blocking wide receiver. And apparently he's making waves for, to be the wide receiver 3, which would be unexpected over someone like Jacoby Jones or Javarius Johnson or whomever, Bradell Richardson. So I'm interested to see how that shapes up. But until I see the depth, I'm not convinced about anyone other than Hudson and Townsend in my mind right now.
And you kind of alluded to it, like with the running backs, Gus is just kind of like, I'm just going to play my guys that I kind of trust, I guess. Like, I know what I get out of them. I wouldn't be surprised if because he kind of did that last year, like you said. He just played Javon Baker and Kobe Hudson and Xavier Townsend, and that was pretty much it. So I wouldn't be surprised if he just kind of rode Kobe Hudson and Xavier Townsend.
But I think they need more than just those 2, though. You know what I mean? Like, we're one injury away from being like, if you don't have some other proven guys, you're screwed. Yeah. So, like, I agree, though.
I feel like it's a product of the offense, though. Like, I mean, Gus just leaning on the run a little bit heavier than what we saw with those guys that you just mentioned, like Trey Nixon and Marlon Williams and all this. So
well, I think that's part of it. I think part of it is, who we had at quarterback, right? And the style of offense that we wanted to play there. And then you got like Timmy McClain, who could throw the ball. We saw him in 3 games and he could throw the ball. He had a beautiful deep ball, but he couldn't throw anything underneath or in the middle of the field. And neither JRP struggled in the middle of the field. I feel like, Kobe Hudson, and again, I think I mentioned this last podcast, he was actually leading Javon Baker through a lot of the season until the last 2 or 3 games. So I think Gus's offense was more along the lines of last year. Hey, we're going to run heavy. We're going to use JRP He threw to the tight end a few times as check downs, but other than that, he was throwing verticals, right? So he was throwing go routes because he knew he had two guys that could adjust to the ball and go and get it. And I think this year the goal is not to do that. I think Xavier Townsend also was hurt last year. That's something else that we didn't talk about, right? We just to tell you how beat up our team was last year, and this is the offensive line. We played 4 centers last year. 4.
Yeah.
Right. So our entire team, there was many, many more injuries than people understand with last year's team. And it still was one of the top performing offenses in the entire country. I think that, as far as just period and rushing.
I am saying most of it had to be made up from rushing though. Like if you take, like I envision like passing yard or like, receiving passing yards. Like I don't think we were probably in the top 25.
We were, I looked at the stats I think it was a couple of shows ago we talked about this, and I think it was a lot closer. It was like 56-44 rushing versus pass plays last year, or 57-43, something like that. So it was a lot closer to a 50-50 than what we think. So I need to go back and look at those stats again. But, even at a 60-40 split, that's typically what you're going to see out of offenses. And, granted now when we were in the Frost days, we'd have a 50-50, more closer to a 50-50 split, but we had Mackenzie Milton in the backfield, right? But typically you're going to see somewhere around 55 to 60-40 split, as far as offense goes. That being said, going back to the wide receivers, I think we've got X. We got X back healthy. If he stays healthy, that's great. If not, I think Johnny Richardson goes into that slot receiver position. We do have Javarius Johnson that could also slot in at the slot. Chauncey Magwood, I think, is good. I think Jacoby Jones is going to be good. But I think, Burdell Richardson, all you heard about in fall camp was Burdell Richardson and how good he was. Trey likes to talk about the special talents that you see out in camp that you can tell. Because, again, the ones are going to play against the twos. The threes are going to get in there as well. And so they're going to mix it up to see who's got talent. And Burdell Richardson was consistently being talked about. So I would not be surprised if worst come to worst and we did lose, one of those vertical receivers. I could see Burdell Richardson slotting in nicely into that position. But I think we have that. And I think we've got pass catching tight ends, which is the next position group that we were going to talk about is tight ends, right? But for wide receiver, I do think Kobe obviously is wide receiver 1. I would not be surprised to see Jacoby Jones as or Chauncey Magwood as wide receiver 2. I still think Xavier Townsend is going to be playing slot, but he was, being moved around to wide receiver 2 as well before the spring game. So it's really interesting to me, but I think we're in a better position from a wide receiver perspective than I know, Alan, you're like, prove it, right? Which makes total sense given the history of transfers. But I do think I feel comfortable where we're at with the wide receiver position as it stands right now.
Yes,
I think we'll be better, and I'm more confident than I was the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm just kind of in that prove it stage. So we'll see. And I really do like the freshmen they brought in. So I think there's more options. I'm just curious to see if they, it ends up materializing on the field.
And just for context, and to both of y'all's point, we didn't have the passing behind center that we potentially have this year with KJ Jefferson. But last year we were 42nd in the country in passing yards per game. And
right. So decent, not great.
Yeah, decent, not great. Certainly middle of the road. But we were 5th in the country in rushing yards per game.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it's just, it's a run heavy offense in general. But this year, I don't know, with the running back depth, and then you raise the level at quarterback, it's almost combined with, potentially a lack of depth at wide receiver. It's like, do you see the same thing, or do you actually see both things rising? I don't know. Hopefully it's both.
I think we lean on the tight ends a little bit more because Randy Pittman, I expect to have a breakout year, and he's not the only pass catching tight end that we have either, right? So you've got Reese Atkins, who 6'6", 250. You got Jordan Davis, which after his injury, he's kind of been put out of commission. So I don't know if he's going to see anything but special teams. Last year, he kind of almost sat out for the whole year. You've got Kylan Fox, who I'm excited to see. He's 6'4", 217.
Is he listed at tight end? I thought I saw something him playing receiver.
Nope, he's listed at tight end. He was recruited at tight end and is listed at tight end as a freshman.
Fox?
Yeah.
They moved him to wide receiver for the spring, and then they moved him back to tight end after the spring.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he's clearly got hands if they were willing to try him out for a little bit at wide receiver.
He just needs to put on some weight.
Yeah, 217 is light for a tight end at this level. Evan Morris, he's a solid transfer, 6'5", 245. Obviously, we've got Randy Pittman at 6'2", 225. Grant Stevens, 6'4", 225. He was a decent recruit as far as he's only a sophomore. And, I could see him more as the blocking tight end, but I could see him being used. And then we've got Thomas Wadsworth. And unfortunately, Thomas, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about you.
Evan Morris is definitely a blocking tight end, though. He's only had like 3 receptions his long career at Michigan State. So he's going to be the blocking to Pittman's catching ability if they're both playing.
I think Pittman and Kylan Fox, they may go with a 2 tight end set with a receiving set if wide receivers is a weak point, right? And if you had X and then you had a tight end, a 2 tight end receiver set, I could see that creating mismatches with the combination of X and a lot of options in the middle of the field if we decided to do that, especially in red zone situations, right? Because we leaned heavy on running in the red zone last year. And because of that, I mean, defenses, what do? You've got shorter yardage. You've got less yardage to cover. You're going to bring the safeties, kind of set them along the goal line, and you're going to let you're going to play a run defense, and you're going to blitz, and you're going to bring some cornerbacks down and some safeties down. So when you try to run in the red zone, and that you don't have as much of a passing game, I think that having tight ends that can hurt you and hurt you consistently, especially in those situations, I could see Kylan Fox going in there with Randy Pittman. I think that will help us, especially in our red zone offense. So, and it's funny because Randy Pittman's a sophomore. He's from PC. He's from up my way, right? And he's only 6'2", where most tight ends these days at this level are 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", right? And then you've got Kylan Fox on the other end, who's got the frame. He's 6'4", 217, and according to Tre's math, high school math, we got to take 15 pounds off of that. So he's really 202, right?
Well, he's in college now, so if they have him listed, that it's probably like he might be there or maybe a little lighter, but he was a skinny guy coming out.
He definitely was.
Yeah.
But he was also a highly touted guy coming out too. And I remember that recruitment waiting on him to pick. And there were a couple big name schools that were in there with him too. So Ben, I don't know. I think, you can talk about Randy, but he really wasn't ready and wasn't in that role as a pass catching tight end last year. But I think this is his breakout year.
Yeah, I think we about covered it. So I mean,
he had the 4th most catches last year, though. I mean, on the team, so he was pretty solid compared to what we've had at tight end recently, at least.
Yeah, and I think that what you just said, Roger, is and what we're kind of talking about here when it comes to the tight ends. I think it seems like Randy Pittman is kind of finally going to be that tight end that's going to be heavily involved in the offense consistently. Obviously, we've had even good tight ends that have been involved in the offense consistently, even under Gus. But like I don't know, maybe just the explosive tight end that we've been looking for, the one that could really, be a consistent threat on offense is. It seems like Randy Pittman, ever since his freshman year, seemed like somebody who could fill that.
He reminds me of Malachi Lawrence on defense. Like we're waiting. This is his
Right?
year.
Yeah, we're like this is. Yeah, he's right on the cusp.
Alan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, Randy Pittman's just going into his sophomore year. I mean, if you recall last year, he was all Big 12 conference honorable mention for the freshman that they put out on that list. I thought he had a phenomenal year for a freshman. I mean, I would venture to say that I think he had like 215 yards and a touchdown. That's probably the best pass catching tight end season we've had for a freshman in a long time. And even in general, I mean, even like to me, there hasn't been a true pass catching tight end since Jordan Akins left. I mean, you've had some guys like Klubiale and obviously Alec Holler that have had okay seasons, but I would say neither of them probably had that much more than 215. I think they probably all had under 500. So by comparison, that was really good. And when you consider just his freshman year, I think he's poised for a big breakout season. And I think Roger's a good point that, if I'm worried about the wide receiver depth, I think Pittman can help shore that up, be, obviously not a wide receiver, but be a guy that can, get it done through the air. So if we don't really have a true wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, depth is lacking there, I think he can kind of take that spot, similar to how Jordan Akins was kind of like a nice, 1-2 punch with Traquan Smith in 2017. I think that can kind of exist there. So I'm excited about that. And then you have Kylan Fox, who everyone's talking up as well, that could, maybe not this year, but, be the future of the tight end room.
Right. Alec Holler had 244 yards.
That's what I'm saying. By comparison, 215 really that's a stellar year compared to recent UCF tight ends.
Freshman? Yeah, for a true freshman, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Especially in a room with Javon Baker, Xavier Talent, like getting that kind of production is really good.
Yeah, I think he had the 4th most catches on the entire team. So he was up there.
So I don't think there's very much of a battle here. I think, obviously I expect going into and coming out of this camp, Randy Pittman will be number 1 pass catching tight end. I agree. Evan Morris will be the blocking tight end, but I'm interested to see how Kylan Fox is going to be used, and also Grant Stevens. I mean, he's more of a blocking tight end, but it'll be interesting for me to see how Kylan Fox is used and how much time he gets in place of Randy Pittman throughout the season. Because he's fast, he's light, and he can catch, and he's tall, so he makes a big target. So I could see that being a good opportunity, especially if we do what I think we're going to do, which is utilize Johnny Richardson in space a little bit more and get some more passes in space as well. I think he's going to be utilized more this season than he was last. So if we're going to start opening up the middle of the field, having a pass catching tight end is going to be a really positive thing. All right. So we've talked about tight ends. Let's talk about the offensive line. So they've been mentioned a few times. And as George O'Leary said, and most people say, games are won in the trenches. And, we had a pretty solid offensive line last year. It wasn't terrible. Like I said, we had some injuries, so we had a lot of movement. You had Beulah Schmidt that was involved at center. Caden Kittler was involved at center. Who was the other one?
At center,
Powley was the last one that finished at center. That's kind of who we settled on. But there was another one. I think it was it Marcellus Marshall? Somebody else was at center. But center seems to be Caden Kittler's. We did hear from offensive line coach Herb Hand that said that Caden Kittler got his leg rolled up on early. I think it was the Boise game, so he was out for a month. And Beulah Schmidt came in. Then Beulah Schmidt got hurt. Then, Caden Kittler came back, and then he got hurt again. So, then we were back to Powley for to ride it out for the rest of the season. But what was different that I heard offensive line coach Hands say is that they are doing more rotation, and the entire team is doing this. They're getting more rotation at their respective positions, so they get snaps in the off season, so that they're able to rotate on the offensive line. Because in his words, and he talked about his philosophy today on the offensive line, there's people that are assigned as backups at each position, but I'm going to play the top 5 to 6 guys that I possibly can. So if one goes down, it's going to be the 6th guy, whether he's out of position or not, playing that position because he's the 6th best offensive lineman that I've got. So that kind of puts some context behind things when people were wondering, well, why are we shuffling right tackle? Why are we shuffling right guard so much? Why are we center's obvious. If the guys are hurt, the guys are hurt, right? But why are we shuffling those other guys around and not putting the backups in? That's why. And he also mentioned that they're doing that as a Gus has been doing that, and Gus mentioned it too in one of his pressers. He's had 3 so far already. That they're doing a lot of having a lot of guys play different positions, so because they had so many injuries last year and last season, so that they can get the top guys out there, whether they're playing out of position or not. So it was very interesting. This year, you've got Caden Kittler expected at center. Marshall is coming back again this year. He'll be at right guard. Right tackle right now is Paul Rubelt, which happy for that guy. He put in the effort, ate a lot of bratwurst and schnitzel, and he's definitely got the size, but now he's putting the skill behind it. Adrian Medley is expected at left guard. And Kite is back at left tackle. He was a big transfer last year. People forget about Amari Kite, but he was a big transfer name last year, and is one of the guys that we expect to to continue to fulfill that. Then you've got Winclair Flynn Jr., big recruit this year that's already getting some play. Jabari Brooks. You've got or is it Jabari Brooks? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Yeah, Jabari Brooks. Yeah.
Jabari Brooks, yeah. You've got Dorsey, Keegan Smith, Patrick Barnett, and Keon Cox. Now, Keon Cox is another guy to kind of watch as he develops. But so far, you've got Kittler, Marshall, Rubelt, Medley, Kite. There's actually more experience than you would expect. On the line, I'm expecting a lot of big things out of Kite this year. Caden Kittler, we're hoping that he's got his penalties in check, because that was a problem for Caden Kittler last year on snaps. Marcellus Marshall's coming back again this year. Obviously, Rubelt is back, but he hasn't played before. So from that starting lineup from last year, you've got 3 of those offensive linemen coming back. That's a lot more stability than what you would expect. Now, there's less stability in the depth, but when it comes to the starting offensive line, that's what it's looking like. What do you guys want to add to that?
I think the only thing I'll add is just another thing on Kite. I am excited to see him back. Well, 2 things, I guess. One is Kite. He graded out as the best pass blocking, grade for Pro Football Focus last year, 83.6. That was the best among our offensive linemen on the team. And then you already mentioned this, Roger. Just the other thing I'm excited about the offensive line is hopefully stability. I'm all for switching around certain positions if you feel like certain are better, but the center position I feel like is one that needs to have stability. And so I'm hoping that Kittler is able to remain healthy this year and just be our guy, our main option at center. And there's none of that, potential, inconsistencies with our quarterback in that exchange or anything like that. I just feel like the center position is one that you shouldn't mess with too much if you are able to, keep that consistent.
And we'll talk about penalties when we get to the defense, because there was 123 snaps and 20 some defensive penalties, only 6 on the offense in their scrimmage. But, that's going to be that was a big thing. That was a big theme for Gus last year. And remember, Amari Kite, he was an Alabama offensive lineman, highly touted offensive lineman. So I expect him to continue to do big things. And he's one of the few guys, he's 6'7", 318 pounds. He's one of the few guys that, for transfers that have really made a difference since he stepped onto UCF's campus. So, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line is, gonna, every year, is gonna play a big part in the success. And I think we've seen varying levels of success with the offensive line under Gus. It's been always solid. Obviously, I don't think our run game would be as prolific if the O-line wasn't at least, serviceable, which it has been. And we finally have a little bit of continuity. Yes, we did lose some guys to graduation in the portal and whatnot, but you have Marcellus Marshall coming back after a really strong year where he was all Big 12 honorable mention. Then you have guys like Amari Kite, who's coming back, who's expected to have a big year. Then Adrian Medley, who was really expected to be a starter last year before he tore his ACL, is back and expected to be a starter. So I think those are guys that have been in the program for at least 2 years now. And then, of course, Caden Kittler as well. So we finally have a year where we haven't exclusively relied on transfers to build the entire offensive line. It looks like right now there's a potential for all 5 starters if Rubelt ends up being a starter, where that everyone in the starting room or every starting O-lineman was on the team last year, which is not something we could say in quite some time, really, since the portal era started. And yes, we still brought in some transfer O-line guys, but it looks like a lot of those are going to be more, depth pieces or, second string. So I think with the continuity and some of the stars that have coming back, like Kite and Marshall, I think there's some potential there. I think, as always, the question, especially in a conference like the Big 12, will be the depth. How many guys can we really throw in there if there does happen to be injuries like there were last year to guys like Kittler and some of the guys that you mentioned. So that, to me, is the key, is the depth. Our guys like Jabari Brooks and Keegan Smith and some of these guys we brought in from some FCS schools and a few other schools, are they going to pan out, and can they be relied on in, if there are some injuries? But yeah, obviously this, like Ben said, I think the center position is going to be something, we want to look at as an anchor, but we have some options there, whether it's Claire Flynn Jr. or Kittler or Brooks. So I think I'm excited about the O-line. I like that there's some continuity for the first time in a while.
Well, something to consider. I'm just going to go through the size of our line this year, right? So Patrick Barnett, 6'6", 300 pounds. Jabari Brooks, 6'3", 335. Jonathan Klein, 6'4", 295. We didn't really talk about him because he's a freshman. Colin Cook, 6'3", 310 pounds. Keon Cox, 6'5", 280 pounds. Now he's going to fill in because he's a freshman as well. Wes Dorsey, 6'7", 315 pounds. Claire Flynn, we mentioned him, 6'2", 304 pounds. Really big recruit. Freshman. We've got a lot of freshmen. Thomas Garrity, 6'4", 280, freshman. Ethan Higgins, 6'6", 280, freshman. Shaheem Hill, 6'4", 342 pounds. That's a big dude. He's a sophomore. Amari Kite, 6'7", 318 pounds. Cameron Kinney, 6'3", 315. Caden Kittler, who's also only a sophomore. Remember, he was highly recruited. Highly recruited recruit from last year, 6'3", 295. Chase Malamalala, freshman, 6'6", 300 pounds. So another big guy with a big frame. Marcellus Marshall, 6'5", 310. Adrian Medley, 6'5", 305. So, I'm not going to bore you guys with this. And obviously you've got Paul Rubelt, 6'10", 330 pounds. But the line that we're putting together right now, all of them are going to be somewhere between 6'3" and 6'6" and well over 300 pounds. Our average line, when we were, in Conference USA beating Baylor, was 6'1", and it was 305. So that the guys that we're bringing in are much larger frame, and we've got we obviously did a lot in freshman recruiting this year to bring in some O-linemen that A, are highly touted, and B, can grow into the position. So we have some more of that continuity, which to Alan's point, we really haven't had in a really long time. So, all right. So we've talked about offensive line. It's not so offensive, so that's good. Let's talk about, let's kind of transition here and talk about camp a little bit. We went over what we had. We've got some position battles that I think we talked about, right? I don't really think Montgomery versus Johnny Richardson is one. I know for me, I think Montgomery is going to get the vast majority of the carries. I think Johnny Richardson's going to get his carries either out of the backfield into tunnel screens like we talked about earlier, or some gadget plays like jet sweeps or reverses or things like that, which we like to play and have been a staple. Although jet sweeps last year weren't as big of our playbook as they were in the past, I think that we're going to bring that back, and that's really where he's going to come into play. So Trent Whittemore versus Jacoby Jones. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think for the number 3 wide receiver, I think X is really the number 3. He's the slot receiver. But as far as the true number 3 guy, do you guys see Whittemore or do you see Jacoby Jones?
I mean, if Whittemore's adding all this value in the run game, I think he probably edges it out. As far as, I guess, just stat-wise catches, I don't think they're going to really feature him that much. I think it's going to be, like you said, it'll be Randy Pittman, X, Kobe Hudson, and I think we're going to run the ball. So I don't know if he's going to make the impact, in the pass game, but I think if he's adding that much in the run game, I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field, if that's what they're saying. So that would be my guess for right now. And, again, he's been here for a year or two. Just that continuity and understanding of the offense, where to be. Kind of finding your role within a team with a lot of stars. Sometimes having that dirty work guy is awesome in the offense as well.
Alan?
After seeing Jacoby Jones or hearing about Jacoby Jones' performance in the recent scrimmage earlier this week or last week, whenever it was, and catching 2 touchdowns, the natural inclination would be to go towards that. But everything I've heard, just from talking to several people like through my page, is that Trent Whittemore looks like he's on the path to lock down that like starting role, whether you want to call it wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, just going to be a starter at wide receiver. So, it feels like it's the battle between those two. Those have like the inside track right now, but it seems like just based on his ability to block, the fact that he made a lot of improvements in the offseason, it seems like it's his to lose right now, which you'd have told me that, prior to, or just like, heading into the offseason after a last season when it kind of looked like he was a bust. I know he played in, all the games, but he only had 3 catches. And yes, he was, used for, blocking and stuff like that. But I just didn't see him carving out a pass catching role. And that's what it seems like. Everything I'm hearing, it's going to be him, whether I agree with that or not.
Yeah, I think for me, I think Jacoby, I think it's going to be, I think Whittemore, to your point, may be used for his blocking more than anything else, but for the receiving portion of it, I think Jacoby Jones, and I honestly think Chauncey Magwood, I keep hearing his name. I know he played at UK before and transferred over, and he didn't do as much last year. But I think Chauncey Magwood is going to earn himself some playing time this year as well. Ben?
Yeah, I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll say I agree with you guys. I think that.
So what he just said was he doesn't actually agree with us. He's just doing that for the sake of time.
No. It seems like, I don't know. I don't want to say it doesn't necessarily matter who the wide receiver 3 is or the number 3 option wide receiver. It just seems like everything's kind of gearing up to being a more run heavy offense overall. And that if Whittemore provides that extra boost in the run game because of his blocking ability. I think that's going to translate into him, getting a lot of snaps at wide receiver. Now, it would be great if he does all of a sudden kind of turn into more of a pass catching threat in this offense, because I think we do need some options on that front outside of the guys that we've talked about in addition to Pittman. But we just have a lot of weapons on this offense as far as the running game goes, and certainly high-powered weapons at the top of the wide receiver game. So I think it's kind of like we'll see a lot of rotation at that third option on the wide receiver slot.
All right. So breaking news, courtesy of Trey Neal, Javon Boggs has flipped to UCF. So that's huge. We were in it with him with Missouri at the time, and he's from Cocoa, Florida. And, he committed to Missouri in July, but we got him 6'1", 200 pounds from Cocoa. So I imagine Alan will have a complete breakdown of Javon Boggs for us at wide receiver for next week. But that's huge news, because he's a very highly touted and yet another stellar receiver to bring into that wide receiver room that Alan thinks isn't that great. So, I'm just joking. The last position group to kind of talk about is, Walclair Flynn has run with the ones quite a bit. Despite being a freshman recruit that just came in, has been running with the ones quite a bit. Now, early on in camp, and you're going to have more of that, and as people settle and as they gear up for the season, that will probably change. But Walclair Flynn Jr. was very highly touted. He's got the right size now and already, and they don't typically run with the ones. They may run with the twos, they may run with the threes, but if there's a guy who's a freshman that's coming in that's running with the ones in camp, that tells me that he's got a shot. Caden Kittler, again, last year, highly recruited center, and for us, and Walclair Flynn Jr. is ranked higher than what he was last year, had some issues with snapping last year and penalties. If Caden Kittler does not perform at a high level, do you guys think that Walclair Flynn Jr. gets the opportunity to maybe step in? I mean, center is a very cerebral position when it comes to the offensive line. They're the captain of the offensive line. They're helping the quarterback identify defenses and call out run blitzes and making adjustments at the line. I'm not sure only for that reason. I think physically he has the attributes to do it, but as Trey has said, and I've said in the past too, when you're playing high school football versus what college football is, the speed of the game, as they always say, is completely different, and the ability to make those mental checks and not have to think about what you're doing as much plays a huge role, especially when you're having to think about what's happening in front of you, make those checks, then snap the ball, and to get ready for a Big 12 level defensive lineman coming at you. And then if you've got a lot of inside zone reads, that means your center may have to block two people. They may have to move them to a different position. You got to make sure you have the right reads for the defense and be able to put them in the right place. I think Walclair Flynn Jr. may have an opportunity towards the end of the year to get some snaps, especially if Caden Kittler, starts off the way he did last year. What do you guys think?
I mean, if he's rotating with the ones now, he might be starting now. I mean, it's very rare for a true freshman to come in and start on the O-line. Just the physicality from high school to college is night and day, especially in the trenches. It's a lot easier, starting at wide receiver as a true freshman, corner, the less physical positions. And I mean, every position in football is physical except like kicker. But when you're able to start in the trenches or even just rotate in the trenches, you're probably going to play. So I don't know where he's settled in at. I don't know if it's center, guard, wherever. But if he's coming in as a true freshman, getting reps with the ones, that's something we should definitely pay attention to. I didn't know that. To be honest, I don't even know who the kid is. But if he's getting reps with the ones, that's crazy. I mean, that's something we should take notice. He probably will play a lot early. I wouldn't be surprised if he starts at the beginning of the year, just depending on how it shakes out.
So he was rated as the second center in the nation last year. So
what?
4-star prospect, Loganville or Grayson, Georgia. He was a second-team All-American in 2023. His fourth year earning All-America honors for that. So, he's a legit center prospect. And as a freshman, 6'2", 304. I'm pretty sure Matt Lee, who started 4 years, wasn't 6'2", 304 coming as a freshman.
Well, I mean, look at Caden Kittler. He's listed at 295 pounds right now,
yeah.
6'3", 295, right? So
yeah, so
he's already got 10 pounds on him.
Yeah, the kid played football at a high level in high school. I understand the transition is tough, but I mean, he wasn't. He's a top 250 player, but he wasn't. At his position, he was number 2 in the country according to the publications that we actually pay attention to. So.
That we actually pay attention to. I love how you said that.
Well, I mean, yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. He's probably. Have they dropped like a depth chart? Not like the random.
No, they're not going to do that
before the season, right?
Yeah, they're going to. Their whole thing right now is, we want guys to compete, including the guys that were there last year to compete for those slots. So. But they're not going to tip their hat.
He's rotating in with
he was rotating in with the ones in camp. I can tell you that much right now.
So that makes it interesting. On top of the pedigree, that makes it fascinating that he's taking first team reps as a true freshman at center, which is, like we said, is a very important position. That's a fascinating story that we have to keep our eye on.
Yeah, especially and like you just said. Ben, number 2 center in the country.
Yeah, he's legit.
He's legit, bro. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if when they release that depth chart, he's the starting center as a true freshman.
Well,
that just changes everything. That changes a lot. All that information y'all just gave in the last 5 minutes. That changes everything. Just the recruiting pedigree. And I know we don't want to just dive into rankings, but being the ranked number 2 center in the country by any website, coming in as a true freshman, rotating with the ones, there's a reason they're doing that. That's just not something you bat an eye at. That's big time.
Well,
that's coming in as a true freshman and a week into camp, he's with the ones. There's a reason they're doing that.
That tells you though the level of recruiting that we're recruiting at right now.
Yeah, goodness gracious.
Yeah, he was first team All-State as a junior and senior.
Yeah, holy smokes.
Yeah, he's legit. He's a legit prospect coming out of high school.
It says he started as a true freshman in high school.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
he's a beast.
Alan, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago. I think he's the second highest rated offensive line commit in the history of UCF. So. And for him to be competing already as a freshman, like everyone has already said, is very impressive. So, I mean, I think Kittler still has the inside track there just because he started pretty young, at the position and was looking really good last year until essentially injuries derailed his season. And then it was kind of a rotating door. So I still think he could get that position back just with given his experience. But I wouldn't be surprised if, Flynn's getting, extensive playing time this upcoming season, whether it's the starter or the backup.
You're
on mute, Roger.
I can't hear you, Roger.
All right. We kind of beat the position battles to death here. So let's, Alan, do you want to give us a little bit of the camp update of what we've heard so far as performance by individuals?
Yeah, sure. So some of it we went over kind of during that segment there, but a few updates. I mean, Coach Malzahn has continued to kind of beat the same drum that he's upset with how last year went, and that this camp is going to be really tough, and he's going to really bring back the grit and the grind, I guess, to UCF football. So he's got a new motto, which is TNT, tough and together. He wants UCF to have the identity of being kind of a hard-nosed football team that's super physical, which I think matches up well with how the Big 12, is with just, how the lines are and everything like that. So he's kind of, doubling down on that. But the big thing, obviously, we had our first scrimmage last weekend, and we alluded to Jacoby Jones, our transfer wide receiver from Ohio, brought in 2 touchdown catches, as well as, a kind of overlooked tight end, Grant Stevens, who is a relatively big part of the 2022 class, or 23 class, I should say. He had a touchdown, and he had a touchdown catch. He hasn't really been talked about much, but that was interesting to see. Then as far as the, on the defensive side of things, Quad Bullard had a really sick pass breakup. I suggest everyone check it out. It's on UCF's Instagram page. Broke up a KJ pass. I forgot if it was to Kobe. I think it was to X, maybe. I can't remember, in the end zone there. Had a really nice pass breakup. And then Gus alluded to this, but Miles Montgomery broke off an 80-yard touchdown run in the scrimmage as well. So seeing some of the the transfer guys look good, and then some of the mainstays like Bullard looking good as well. I guess some of the big, on a positive note, the offense had no turnovers, which was obviously a good thing to see. But
is that a positive note, though? Because we're doing that. We're trying to get turnovers on defense.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's good that none of our offensive guys are fumbling or, throwing picks, but a bad thing that the defense didn't force any turnovers. But the thing that really stood out, I think we all saw this, was the team had 18 penalties in that scrimmage alone, and 13 of the 18 came on defense. A lot of pre-snap penalties, according to Coach Malzahn. So something that he's going to emphasize and try to clean up. I know we've had a lot of issues with penalties in the past. There was that 1 year under Coach Heupel, and then a couple of years under Gus, where it's been a problem. It's been a reoccurring problem, just with discipline and things like that, especially on pre-snap penalties. So hopefully that's gets fixed. Some other stuff, during his press conferences, Gus has repeatedly kind of mentioned a couple of these guys that I put out here on this list, which is Malachi Lawrence. Nothing that we're really surprised about there. Obviously, Malachi had a breakout year last year, and with Tremont Morris Brash in the NFL now, Malachi is going to kind of take over that pass rushing defensive end role. Then obviously Xavier Townsend's been mentioned, not only as one of the better receivers, but Gus actually said, quote unquote, he's one of the better players on the team as a whole now. So looks like he's taking a step forward, which is great to see. Then we already talked about Trent Whittemore a lot, so I don't need to mention him. And same with Chauncey Magwood. I think, essentially they listed all the receivers as looking better. So I don't know if that's a good thing to try to make us all feel better, or it's actually the truth. I guess we'll find out soon.
We're trying to respond to your skepticism, Alan.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like he always the problem positions there where he goes over the top to mention guys, but obviously that's good that we're hearing that. And then the other one was the freshman DB Chasen Johnson, who has been really turning heads since the spring. I think a guy that's going to be rotated in right away. I don't think he's gonna be a starter at corner, but I think he's going to play extensive ball next season. So that was great. A couple other things, KJ still not playing live. We already mentioned that as far as the scrimmages, and then the kind of the things that as a whole, just a quick rundown that Gus harped on was, that UCF has 40 new players. He's mentioned that a bunch now, 40 new players between the transfers and the freshmen. So, they have a lot of talent, but they're still learning the playbook, and they still need to, kind of get that chemistry and, know how to play together. They're incorporating a lot of new pieces. Running backs obviously looking explosive. Our running back coach mentioned that obviously the room looks great, and we're no surprises there. The O-line is showing daily development. The wide receivers are looking good, but they're emphasizing on the blocking. They want it to improve there. And then, we kind of really talked about Gus, how he's done his self-evaluation over the last year and how he really wanted to put his stamp on this team by, being the true offensive play caller, not giving up any of those duties, all things we've heard about. And then I guess the final thing would be just Ted Roof. A lot of our defensive players have mentioned this now. They've gotten a lot of questions. What's the biggest difference from last year, from going from last year's defensive coordinator now to Ted Roof? And that is the blitzing and being much more aggressive. So a lot of players talk about, getting to the quarterback. There's a noticeable difference in how aggressive they're being and just how much blitz he's incorporating into the defensive scheme. So, and we'll see what happens. And the next scrimmage is this upcoming Saturday. So on next Monday's show, we should have some more updates about who stood out and, what looked good.
Well, next Monday's recorded show that will probably be out on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Sorry, Tuesday.
So yeah, no, it's all good. I just don't want people expecting us to record at like 9:00 at night and put poor Nobra through trying to put something out Tuesday morning. But that's awesome. I think one of the biggest things that I've heard from everybody in all the interviews is they love that they're being more aggressive, both defensively and offensively, and putting a focus on physicality, which I think one of the things that we've been missing that made Georgia O'Leary's team so great, and also great NFL receivers from those teams, was the blocking downfield. We didn't have a lot of great blocking going on, and that physicality and being physical even with the DBs when you're touching the ball offensively, is 100% different. All right. So the ESPN this week brought out their Big 12 preview. They had UCF at number 10 in the Big 12, which is a little surprising. Yes, we've got some variability in our folks, but remember, this is a 16-team league this year. So saying that UCF is bottom half of the league, it certainly is different than what a lot of other people are saying. I think that's a lot lower than what it should be. Quick thoughts on that, because I know we're getting into the 2-hour mark now. So
who said that about the
ESPN's preview had us at 10 out of 16.
Did they have Colorado above us?
No.
Yeah, no, they didn't. I think it's personally, I just think it's reflective, these preseason, or these previews, I should say, of the Big 12, which we'll see more and more of over the next week or so. But I just think it's reflective of this conference has a couple of teams that are clear favorites, and Utah, Oklahoma State, these teams that, that have a little bit of a reputation coming into this season that nationally is very strong. And I think that's the rest is just, this conference is wide open. I mean, I think that one publication could have us at 10, which it clearly has with ESPN, but another publication could probably justify putting us in the, 5th spot or 6th spot,
I've seen a lot of 6, 7, and 8.
Right. Yeah. That seemed to be the kind of odds or consensus going into these, before we had these preseason previews that are coming out over the next week or so. But anyways, yeah, I think this conference is wide open. There's a couple of teams that are expected to do, very well.
Utah.
Utah and Oklahoma State, I think is one, or,
Arizona.
Arizona. These are teams that are a little bit respected, kind of the upper tier this season of our conference. But I think everything, there's about 7 teams below that. It's just, it's kind of anybody's race at that point. And we're a part of that mix. And there's nothing that says, that we can't be right there with the teams that are mentioned at the top. I mean, playing meaningful football in November is kind of the goal, right? So we'll see what happens.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just such a wide variance amongst all those teams. I think if UCF finished top 2, win the conference, I'd be super excited, but I wouldn't be surprised. But, on the flip side, if we did finish 10th in the conference, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised about that. And that goes with all the teams in the middle. I just think
there'd be a lot of Trey Gus bashing going on if that were the case.
Yeah, of course.
It might be justified.
But I think that goes for like a lot of these teams in that mix. Like I think just the expectations of a lot of these teams from top to bottom are contending for a Big 12 championship. I think I'm not going to say luck, but we're going to need to be on the right side of a lot of these close calls for that to happen. I think because
we were on the wrong side last year. I mean, this was an 8 to 9 team.
Law of averages. So I think again, I think everybody's so close that you're going to see that variance. UCF be 5th, UCF be 10th. Like I think there's just so much variance because all the teams are so close. So it's going to be who makes these plays at the end of games.
Well, I think Phil Steele said it best, right? Whenever he did his projections, and Ben, you'll probably remember this because we interviewed Phil Steele before every season on Nightline. One of his factors for the performance of a team was that if they were within a touchdown, and they lost, more than 1 to 2 games by a touchdown. So if it was consistently within a touchdown, which we lost probably 4 games to 5 games at least that were within 3 points, let alone a touchdown.
They said three losses last year were by a total of 4 points. Yeah,
so sounds an awful lot like the Heupel year, that one year. But the point is his prediction is that team on average will gain at least 3 wins over the previous season. So, considering we went 6 and 7, if we gained 3 wins, even an 8-win season would be a disappointment. And I feel like we truly upgraded talent this year over what we had last year.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like Gus also said it pretty well in his media day press conference when he said, like, I don't know how you can put a whole lot of stock in preseason, polls or previews or whatever when we're talking about an average of 30 to 40 new players on each team. The transfers, it just makes it hard to really predict how a certain season is going to go. So, obviously, would we be talking really positively about this preseason preview if we were 3rd? Yeah, of course we would. But by the same token, I think it's just reflective. Personally, I think it's reflective of how wide open this conference is this year, which is an exciting thing.
And it'll be really interesting to see how the Pac teams perform this year too, right? Because consensus is that the Pac-12 was not as strong as what the Big 12 teams are in aggregate, right? You had some bell cows, but so did we. We had Texas and OU, and KU did really well. KSU was a great team last year. OSU was a good team last year. So in depth. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform versus the Big 12 as well. But at the same time, we're only playing 2 of the same teams that we played last year. So it'll be a learning curve for us as well. All right. Let's talk a little preseason honors. RJ Harvey named to the Doak Walker Award watch list. That's huge. I just, to our point earlier on how many carries he gets, I think that's going to limit him. He was number 3, I think, last year, behind Ollie Gordon and Texas Tech's. I never remember his name. The Texas Tech running back. So I think that's going to be a big thing. William Wells was named to the Werfel, which was named for Danny Werfel Trophy watch list, most impactful leaders in the community. Lee Hunter to the Nagurski watch list, best defensive player. Outland Trophy watch list, best interior lineman. Xavier Townsend named to the Harung Award watch list, most versatile player in college football. So it's always good when you have like a lot of big impact guys that are in these national award lists for contention. So that's always a good sign. Real quick, I want to give some quick listener love to a couple of our new followers on YouTube, Bill Ostendorf and Rock J. Rock J, I don't know what that stands for, but thank you for following. Make sure you tell your friends, and let's keep that going. Alan, let's take us out with Alan's Oxymoronic stat of the week.
Yep, just a quick one. So since we went through that entire depth chart, if that stands and we
you sound excited about that, by the way.
What, the depth chart?
Going through the entire depth chart.
Oh no. But yeah, if that stands, and you're looking at essentially, let's call it, we're specifically talking about the offense. Let's say we're talking about 22 players. If you're talking about the 2 deep, 11 starters, and let's say 11, guesstimated backups that we're, expecting to be kind of in the mix there, most likely. Only 6 out of the 22 started their careers at UCF. 16 out of 22 potential rotational players will be transfers.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's like a 180 from how when I played, at least, teams were built.
Yeah. Complete 180.
Yeah, that's
a 540, dude. You spun around a few more times before you get there. But real quick, I do want to say this just to kind of put a finer point on this Javon Boggs news. This is the highest rated, obviously if he signs, highest rated recruit to date in UCF football history, number 67 nationally.
Wow.
So 67. Number 67 nationally right now. So if he sticks, which I expect he will, again, the people that we were recruiting against, you're talking Georgia, you're talking
Ohio State.
Ohio State. He was committed to Ohio State, decommitted. Then it was Georgia. It was Mizzou, obviously, and a few others. And he ended up at UCF. And that's good because, again, it's part of that Cocoa pipeline that we've been trying to establish for a really long time. And he joined Cedric Hawkins, who also came from Ohio State, was also a Cocoa player that they knew each other. So that's huge. So can't wait for Alan's update on him next week. A lot of positivity, a lot of recruiting battles. Again, this is what it looks like at the beginning of camp. We will talk about it again at the end of camp when we actually have a depth chart, and we'll be able to see how accurate we were with what our thoughts were on this. Claire Flynn, honestly, he's a wild card, I think, for offensive line. And I think with that and some of the other things that we mentioned that Tre even didn't know about, the quality of player that we're bringing in right now is heads and shoulders above where we were and where we're going to keep moving up that ladder. So thanks, guys, for hanging out with us for this long. Thanks, you guys, for hanging out for 2 hours and 22 minutes and 18 seconds. With that, I'm going to bring it to an end. Josh, our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family this week. Go Knights and
charge on.
Charge on, baby. Let's go. Hey, guess what? I get to control the production because he's not doing since Nober is not here this week. So I get to talk as long as I want at the end of the show, unless I decide to cut myself